Welcome to the super creepy and scary, not really Halloween episode of Rantamania. So, alright, we'll get right to it. My last video is way too long, so we'll just get moving. CRT. Alright. This phrase we hear, I think most people don't know a whole lot about what that even is or what it means. You kind of hear bits and pieces and don't, it's a lot of propaganda on both sides, misinformation. So we're going to look into that. And it's important to note, this is something that lots of well-respected evangelical pastors have said. CRT is the #1 threat to Christianity today. It could literally end Christianity, apparently. So we should probably be concerned about it. Okay, so the one thing that we do mostly know, people don't get much farther than this, but let's start at the beginning. What does CRT even mean? Oh, that's what we know, and it is a cathode ray tube. Yes, a cathode ray tube is a vacuum tube containing one or more electron guns, the beams of which are manipulated to display images on a phosphorescent screen. These images, they may represent electrical waveforms, such as an oscilloscope, pictures, radar targets, or other phenomena. So there we go. I don't know why this is such a threat to some people. It's interesting television producing history, I think. But let's delve into this a little deeper, because I know that's why you're here. Now, one of the things you will hear about CRTs, if you play old video games, you are probably actually going to be more familiar with this, because if you're playing an older game, particularly before things jump to more HD digital, where you're plugging with HDMI cable on a modern television, if you're playing things previous to that, you're going to notice there's a lot of lag when you're using component cables, plugging them into a modern television. Things aren't just going to quite match up right. You can adjust to it, but it's just for very precise gameplay. It just isn't quite right. And particularly if you go back to 16-bit games, they use lots of little graphical tricks because they know how it's going to display on a CRT television. They could kind of like work things out in a way and create weird graphical images that when you're playing on a modern television, they don't even show up in the same way that the original game makers intended. So you're losing out a lot by doing that. For quick play, modern television's okay, but if you're really going to be into this, you probably should be using a CRT television. And that's what a lot of people probably have heard about CRT televisions. But there's another thing that I think also gets overlooked. And here's where we really get into it. Now, you go and you watch a movie made in like late 80s, early 90s, or even newer than that. Look at the special effects on that. If they used CGI back then, you look at that on a modern television, unless they've gone back and special editioned it up, it's going to look really bad. It looked decent when you saw it originally. It looked impressive. Now it looks like weird cartoony things are popping up in the live action, and it's just terrible. And it's not only the CGI. You go back to older movies than that. You watch them on a modern television, you're going to see all the little strings and matte paintings in the Godzilla movies. You don't want to see that. Clearly, when you saw these on an old EP recorded VHS tape on your 13-inch television, the blurriness of the CRT hid a lot of these things. And now, if you're watching that on modern television, they've taken the film footage in a lot of cases, they've cleaned it all up and restored it, and that would seem like it's a good thing, but then you're actually not even getting the proper imagery on the screen when you're watching that movie. And I can actually understand why, I guess in this case, the absence of CRT, this could be the end of Christianity. This is very serious stuff. So, in conclusion, what did we learn today? I realize that we don't want them carting out the old CRT television in today's elementary classrooms. I get it, but that's not really so much of what's happening now. Is the usage of a CRT television absolutely correct in all circumstances? No. But there's also a tendency of many to not even take the time to look into CRT televisions, and many of those same people want to pretend that Their fancy OLED or plasma or whatever variety of television they promote is absolutely without flaw. There is a lot in television's past that they either don't want to acknowledge or want to twist history to justify their systemic television views. I think it's important that we be open-minded to the point that we're not giving in to extreme propaganda and misinformation on either side about CRT televisions. Very rarely will the truth be found on either extreme. And most of those who promote the usage of CRT television aren't doing so as part of a grand conspiracy to make lifelong LCD viewers hate that type of television. They're doing so because they themselves have had experiences where the CRT television provides a more accurate representation. That doesn't mean they are right about everything. Certain things will look different through the lens of a CRT television than they'll look through the way that you've just been used to looking at things for a long time now. That's not inherently evil or a bad thing. It's important to be retrospective and look at things and make sure we're viewing them in the correct way as they're intended to be looked at. You may have watched the movie dozens of times, looking at it on your modern television, and it seems fine. Then you go back and you watch it on the CRT television through this different lens, and then you might realize, maybe there are some problems here. It's not bad to point out problems. It's actually the right thing to do. We should, as Christians, always be looking for our own flaws and imperfections, rather it be in the modern church. And while we can't necessarily fix things that have gone on historically, we need to at least acknowledge them and not just try to say, no, that was good, that was great that we did that. We should be listening to people and gaining their understanding. We may not end up agreeing with them, but we're going to at least know why their brain works the way it does, instead of just sort of seeing anyone with a different view as just some sort of like evil monster that we must just fight against and argue with. Because they're humans as well, in the image of God, as we are. And we can learn a lot by just understanding why they're coming at us the way that they are. And finally, this final verse here, which I believe not only fits this specific topic we're talking about, but is also very emblematic of lots of discourse that goes on today. James 1:19. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. But anyway, that is really all I have to say about CRT televisions. They have their place, but, do what you need to do. We'll see you next time. What's critical race theory?